LNO is sitting here today with Mayor Pro Tem Chris Putnam, Colleyville City Council. Remind the viewers of why you originally sought this position.
I always tell people that, I'm a completely accidental politician. I never got involved in city politics, in order to be a city councilman. Originally, my activism started on the west side of Colleyville. I lived in Claremont, which is a Keller ISD district. Basically, the Grapevine Colleyville district was complaining about revenue shortfall as a result of declining attendance. And so I picked up the phone, I called the COO over the district, and I said, hey, I know for a fact that there's literally hundreds of children over here that live in Colleyville city limits that would love to attend Grapevine Colleyville schools. And so from there, we got organized. I worked very closely with the district, and ultimately the transfer policy did get passed, and ultimately had a very positive benefit. Kids that lived in Colleyville can now go to schools in Colleyville. So that's how it started for me. And then I realized that, wow, if you do get involved in local politics, you can affect change. You can make a real difference. I actually showed up at a sidewalk committee meeting to discuss the policy because there was a public hearing component to this meeting. And the mayor at the time, Mayor Kelly, flat out refused to call on me to do the presentation. He closed the meeting without affording me the ability to share my thoughts. And that was the point where I was just like, this just isn't right. This isn't the way that local government's supposed to be. As a resident, a proud Colleyville resident, I felt proud of my city, but I wasn't proud at all about what I was seeing in my local government. And at that point, it was just like, your choice is to complain or your choice is to try to do something about it. And I chose to do something about it.
When you first went on city council, it appeared to this reporter that you were like a lone voice in the woods. It was pretty stacked against you and your beliefs. So tell us what you were able to accomplish those first 2 years versus this year.
I was not involved in city politics, so I was a dark horse candidate. Not a lot of folks in town, other than the people in my social circle, knew who I was. And ultimately, we laid out, some of the things that I'd seen that I just described to you, and identified a few critical issues in town, and took our case to the voters. And we won that election 60-40 against a multi-term incumbent. And those sorts of elections hadn't happened in Colleyville in a very long time. So I was absolutely disruptive in that respect. My goal was not to be disruptive. My goal was simply, I had an alternative perspective on a number, some of these larger issues in town. And, as much as anything, I just wanted to open up the conversation to more citizens, allow more citizens to see the process. So, in those first 2 years, the biggest win, one of my original campaign, promises was, to ensure that we had a responsible redevelopment of Highway 26. The only thing that we were doing differently was, dropping a median down it and effectively beautifying it, but it wasn't going to increase traffic capacity. In fact, it would have limited traffic capacity. And so my argument was, look, if we're going to go spend this money, then let's ensure that we have a long-term traffic solution, because with the 4-lane solution that we had, today, we had backup at peak periods. And so, it was interesting the way it all came down. I, basically introduced a amendment at the very last second to expand it to 6 lanes, not knowing if I would even get a second. And fortunately, one of my peers, who happens to be a traffic engineer, seconded it, which led to a lot of discussion. And ultimately we passed the 6-lane solution. And I think it's the right thing. If you're going to spend that kind of money, we need to do it for reasons that are more than strictly cosmetic. And I'm really confident now that we've done that.
Since the election of 3 new council, what have you accomplished as a group at council with this new majority?
Yeah, so it was a very ambitious agenda. And, we had multiple work sessions, goal-setting sessions. There were a lot of things that we wanted to fundamentally change, about the way the city does business. So the highlights really are, first and foremost, and the thing that I'm personally most proud of, was the charter amendments that, basically, created completely new standards for ethics, for transparency, and of course, ultimately implemented term limits. We felt like, given the fact that where we had come from historically as a city, particularly with a lot of the historical vitriol and personal stuff that's gone on in politics here, that it was just super critical that we leave behind a legacy that prevents that from happening again. I challenge anybody to go find a city council that immediately one of the first things they did was term limit themselves out. But that's precisely what we did, because we're not interested in consolidating power or being an institutionalized incumbency either. We want more people involved. It's the difference between individuals with personal agendas that are tied to special interests, like the real estate development community, which was very much controlling this city, making decisions for our community, versus people who have no personal or financial attachments to the policies that we're setting.
Isn't it true that a council person could serve 2 terms, or a total of 6 years, before the term limit statute kicks in?
Correct. So you can serve 6 years. For example, I've served 1 term, so I'm eligible to serve another, even though I'm choosing not to run for re-election. And then that doesn't actually prevent you from serving again in the future. You have to sit out a full term. And so, look, the power of incumbency in any form of electoral politics is just tremendous, and we recognize that. I mean, it was demonstrated here. And so we've just felt like by creating that break, you give more people an opportunity to participate without having to do the things that we've had to do in the last 2 years to kind of wrestle control back from the special interests, which is spend a tremendous amount of money, exert a lot of personal effort, and at times take a lot of very deeply personal attacks from long-term incumbent politicians.